it's live.
Okay. Kia ora koutou. We're just about to go live, so councillors can get to their seats, please. We've got some missing. Where's Ian? Okay. So I think we can go live, Oliver.
Yes, that's all good.
Okay, so thank you. So, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to the Strategy and Policy Committee meeting on June the 4th. We've had a Karakia already at the Regulatory Hearing Committee meeting, which was earlier this morning, so we won't have a Karakia. So really, I just to welcome everybody here. Welcome to members of the public. We do have a deputation, so welcome to Davina Penny. So I'll welcome you more formally for that part in a little bit, and welcome to staff and to all the councillors. So we'll jump in then to apologies. So I haven't had any apologies. We do have Councillor Cranwell, Korako and Diche online. Can I ask councillors if you have any conflicts of interest today to declare? So that's none. And so we're then into public forums, deputations and petitions. And so we do have one, as we mentioned about 30 seconds ago. So Davina Penny, if you would like to come to the table. And so Davina's going to talk to the paper that we have coming up for decision as item 8.1 on the dust research. And so Davina, you'd like to give your deputation to us, and so you have 10 minutes to speak, and we can take questions, and I understand you don't have a presentation, so that's great. You just share with us what you want to share. Thank you.
Thank you for hearing me today. I'm usually reserved and measured in my response, but that's got nowhere. So yes, I acknowledge what I say here is raw emotion, and I do not make any apologies for that. What I say is opinion, which I acknowledge may not hit home well. My comments are not about councillors. Dealings with councillors have always been positive, and I have full respect for all of you and what you do. I've been fighting to have protections in place from an activity that's proven to be harmful for 7 years. Others have been fighting even longer. And the question we always ask is, what hold does the industry have over our councils, where they seem to have never been required to change their attitude, their approach, or their practices? Why is it ECAN will proactively be on the lookout for and immediately be on the case of someone who tries to keep warm in winter but uses an unlawful wood burner, but then turn a blind eye when people are crying out for help when they're impacted by an activity that creates discharge 14 hours a day, 6 days a week potentially, year round? This issue has been ongoing for many years, too many. After the quakes, when there was need for aggregate to facilitate the rebuild, the genie was let out the bottle. Consents were granted quickly, and understandably so. However, the situation's now changed. The demand has dropped, but the request for consents has grown, as has the supply. But the approach to granting consents has not been appropriate. It is not enough to say, yeah, but the RMA says. As soon as the effects less than minor mantra is accepted, ECAN have taken the easy cop-out. And this is to the detriment of folks who've done nothing wrong other than live in a rural environment. Not even in a quarry zone in some cases, where the operators have extended operations to the extent they're now outside the zone, impacting more and more residents who are helpless in the face of this sprawl. To say we've been let down by an authority that has an obligation to us as part of the environment and a duty of care is an understatement. ECAN in the main, in all my times of contact, have done little more than fob off or deflect. There's been no real change to dealing with the dust issue in the past 5 years, and it appears from reporting nothing will change. We rather expected that as an outcome, but had a glimmer of hope that we were wrong and being unfairly cynical. How foolish we were. Despite a significant amount of taxpayers' dollars being spent on looking into the issue. Now, to explain how we got here, for benefit of first-term councillors, here's a brief overview, and it goes some way to explaining why I am so angry and frustrated. In 2020, Craig heard from residents who were desperate to have their voices heard. They had suffered for years, but nobody had listened, other than maybe a local MP. Some have significant health issues that have been long-term and debilitating, including one elderly lady who has been diagnosed with symptoms of silicosis. And no, she is not a stonecutter, but she has quarry-crushing material 600 to 800 metres from her. And thanks to Craig, there was a series of workshops where residents made clear to ECAN staff what was going on and what needed to change. Those being setbacks that were realistic and based on scientific reporting of dispersal of PM10 and crystalline silica, as well as data reporting. Yes, we did ask for 1 kilometre. Heck, anything would be better than the situation we have, where 100 to 200 metres from a person's house is regarded as acceptable. We asked for a review of the appointments of commissioners and Section 42's reporters. We've not seen any change there either. Section 42 reporters represent ECAN, who are often from companies that also represent the industry. We asked for better compliance monitoring and the acceptance of evidence provided by residents where it's clear from video footage and weather data, etc., there is dust leaving the quarry and causing the impact. Well, there's been no change, so there is now return for residents to not bother reporting impacts. Why waste time if there's little to no chance of a timely attendance and zero chance that the actual evidence they provide is going to be accepted? PM10 is invisible, yet compliance staff only act on a certain volume of visible dust, and even then it appears just cursory. We were assured there would be follow-up sessions where residents who volunteered could in effect be part of this working party following the workshops where solutions would be proposed. That didn't happen. We were then informed there would be a literature review looking at various aspects, including statutory approaches elsewhere, and we asked that the body doing this not be the one that has represented the industry, and that they be truly independent. That didn't happen. Instead, the contract was given to a company who routinely represent the industry, and the question is why? Were the staff involved truly that uncaring, or was there another reason? Because our strong and evidenced opposition was just ignored. It was therefore no surprise the resultant review was so compromised, in my opinion, it was of no value other than to the industry. I even learnt through a El Goima request that the skeleton review submitted was taken from a report that had formed part of a report on behalf of an applicant. So that was a waste of money, again, and has led to no change. There are things that can and should be done which do not require statutory changes through plans or policy statements, and they were highlighted by many of us in our feedback. Again, we have appeared to have wasted our time. All appeared to be ignored. But I had a feeling that was going to be the case. If there was a real chance that things would be tightened up with the operators having to up their game, we would have seen pushback from the industry. And the fact we did not experience that is somewhat telling. I presume they knew they had nothing to worry about. They could carry on as usual. So where do we go from here? Well, I don't have the answer. We have been misled, and I would also suggest the feeling is actually that of being lied to on occasion. We have been ignored, dismissed, and in effect, just treated with contempt. In the meantime, we have residents who are friends of mine suffering badly, and they deserve better. They have lost quality of life, and one family routinely has to leave and go to a holiday home where they can clear their lungs before returning to repeat the cycle. They have homes that they cannot even think of selling. I mean, who would want to buy near a quarry? Other than the industry, who then just extend onto that land, thus impacting the next in the chain. And that happened only just last year. I liken it to the spread of the red weed in War of the Worlds. So what do I ask of you? Please vote against any proposal that does nothing to bring about change, that does nothing to protect current residents or those in the future who are hapless and subject to such applications. Please vote against anything that allows a continuation of the status quo. And please vote against anything that absolves the council of responsibility to address something that is making people sick. Please insist on residents being allowed to be participants in applying solutions. Please insist on having follow-up regular reporting to you of what is being done and what is being achieved. Please keep ECAN staff feet to the fire and ensure something's being done. Please ensure the recommended 500 metre setback in the proposed RPS is not watered down or allowed to be watered down, and is measured from quarry boundary to property boundary. I expect there will be submissions saying it should be removed, and we know who'll be making those submissions. And cynically, we expect Section 42 reporters to potentially agree with those where the setback proposal is removed. That should not be allowed to happen. And here I need to thank Dion for his efforts in getting this into the proposed RPS. If there is to be yet another round of monitoring, and this would be at least the 5th, it has to be beyond reproach and independent. No involvement of industry or companies who represent the industry. No monitors on quarry-owned land, as was the case with the moat monitoring for obvious reasons. And involve residents at every stage of the process, including planning. And I say involve, not just inform. And I suggest you liaise with Professor Greenfield, who offered up the university to undertake the study. They would be accepted by residents as being independent and having the means to conduct a robust study. In addition, it was indicated by him the cost would likely be less than that of a contractor. But then raises the question, what happens in the meantime? Do residents have to endure potentially another 3 or 4 years of impacts whilst this is being considered, undertaken, reviewed, and then maybe addressed? How many more quarries we consented in the meantime, meters from people's homes? This has been stressful for me. I am beyond disillusioned, and my emotions have involved to be out and out disgust. Being blunt, we are now in your hands. How you vote and what you request and expect of ECAN staff is now crucial, and is potentially our last chance of having that glimmer of hope kept alight. ECAN have to look hard in the mirror and accept they have played their role in people's lives potentially being shortened, with the quality of that life being unacceptably reduced. And thank you for listening.
It's lovely, thank you. And just about precisely on 10 minutes, but we've certainly got some time for questions. I've got
Sure.
Genevieve.
Oh, thank you, Davina. I can hear your emotion in there, so thank you for bringing that to the table as well. Just a question of clarification. You mentioned in your talk about an example of something happening just last year. Can I ask what that is that you refer to?
Yeah, there was a resident in the Yaldhurst area who was, as I believe, just outside the quarry zone, which had been extending, right up. And, she basically had no choice. The only person she was going to be able to sell to was the industry, which she did. They applied. They are now consented to quarry on that land, so it's extended closer to the people who are her neighbours, and it's also adjacent to the gazetted airshed. They did actually appeal some of the conditions regarding the airshed and monitoring, but I don't know what the outcome of that is. I understood a decision was made last month or in April.
Anyone else? Question? Councillor McKenzie.
Well, just you told us not to do a whole lot of stuff, and then you told us the stuff you wanted us to support. Can we get even if we just get those things that Davina would like us to support, given to us in shorthand?
Yeah, I can actually send this through if people want a copy of my presentation. But in summary, what we need is I did actually in my PDP feedback suggest what could be done by operators and what could be done by the councils with regards to making the changes and being proactive. So I'll probably resend that through as well to all of you. Yeah.
That would be great. You can send it to governance as well. I can give you the email address for that. So I've got Councillor Burns.
Kia ora, Davina, thank you for that. Just to preempt my question, I'm Christchurch Central, a lot of industrial activity on the eastern side of the city, including the storage of quarried materials, and I have a wee bit of an insight into the impact of that. Many of the people that I have on the eastern side of my constituency have found their lives consumed by discharge. Is that a reasonable expectation to say that your life has now been consumed by this?
Yeah, I'm personally about 750 metres away from the quarry in Templeton, and it's not yet fully operational. So I'm certainly looking to see what happens when we get the westerlies as to what the impact is. And I've taken photographs and measurements in my house to see the before and after. But no, I have seen people in Yaldhurst, you know, they're coughing up blood, they're coughing every day. They have to leave fairly regularly and spend weeks away to clear the lungs and come back. And, you know, I have sent before the human rights reporting on clean air and the right to clean air, and certainly we're not taking into account how it could affect children and their development, and that is a big gap that is missing with regards to council awareness or consideration.
Thanks. So, Liam, please.
Kia ora. Just in regards to future engagement with council, we have some options before us today, like do we continue with the status quo, do we have community workshops, those sorts of things. Do you feel that engagement with council has kind of broken down and there's not a way back, or what sort of options are you in favour of in terms of working with council?
I certainly have praise for the role councillors have played because they have listened and they forwarded any concerns. I would suggest the issue is going to be maintaining or getting back the trust of the residents, because it's been eroded so often, they are broken. And I think if they were promised, you know, we'll have these workshops again and we'll do this, I'm not sure that they will fully believe that, because it's happened before and they've been let down every single time. So I think the first thing the council needs to do is work on the issue of building up that trust and showing that they can be trusted and they will follow through and not be given lip service. Once you've got over that hurdle, we've got a chance.
Thank you. Dion.
Thank you so much for coming in. I appreciate it, and for your advocacy as well. It's been really helpful over the years. But one thing that I'm interested in is the Moat report that was done a few years ago. Can you just give us a quick overview of what you thought of that, and then would you support us trying to get the Ministry of Health to redo that in a better way?
Yeah, there were monitoring undertaken before the Moat report, and there was one before that called the personal monitoring, which is the shortened way of referring to it. That was where residents actually wore monitors on their bodies, and it measured the PM10 and RCS, and the readings were sky high. In fact, after the first round, 4 houses were commercially cleaned, organised by ECAN, because of the irrespirable crystalline silica content. Now, unfortunately, that was written off as not conclusive, based on one comment by one particular medical practitioner in an email. There was no report written. And there was a peer review of that by an overseas expert, which showed there were concerns, but that seemed to have been buried. The residents didn't even get that report until I got it through an official request years later. The Moat monitoring, this is where I referred to perhaps the honesty issue. That was supposed to run for a year. That was arranged to run for a year. A proper time frame for doing a proper study, and it was cut short to just, I think it was 3 to 4 months. Now, I had an email showing that ECAN had asked for it to be cut short on the ground of costs, but the public statement put out was we have put enough data, we think we're okay with the data we've got, we're fine, we've got the data. It was cut short on cost grounds. It was over summer, which was the Christmas period, when a lot of activities were closed down for a period of time. And it was also over a period where it was the wettest, I believe, for about 30 years reported. So it was not reflective of what the discharge would normally be experienced. In addition, we found out afterwards that the background monitor was actually on quarry-owned land and was accessible, obviously, by an industry operator. Now, I would suggest, you know, with my inexperience, but my little bit of scientific background from school, that wouldn't really be valid to have a monitor accessible by somebody who's subject to being monitored. So there were a lot of issues with it, and including Lou Wickham, who was involved. She was from, I think it was at Mission Impossible. She was involved in the monitoring, setting it up, etc. Even she has, at hearings, said you cannot rely on the data from that moat monitoring for various reasons, including the ones I've raised. Unfortunately, it's still relied on and it's not countered by reporting staff. So, yes, we do need something, but we need it to be beyond reproach, as I've mentioned in my presentation. It has to be.
Okay, thank you. And Genevieve, Councillor Lawrenson, you had another question.
Just another quick question. I guess, in your words, what do you think is the fundamental reason that is enabling these quarries to operate in these areas?
I really don't know. I mean, there is something, because this has been going on for so many years, I could go back and, produce much of what I've sent to ECAN and evidence, and the fob-offs or the contempt is inexplainable. People should not have to put up with this. The precautionary principle should be applied. There's enough evidence to show PM10 does disperse long distances. It cannot be contained 24/7. And people who are exposed 24/7 are suffering. We shouldn't have to have another study. There's enough evidence out there. It's going to cost money to do another study, and it's going to take time. The evidence is already there. We need to start protecting people now. It's inexplainable. It really is.
Thank you. And Councillor East, you got a hand up.
Thank you for a very comprehensive presentation. I wonder if you could leave a copy with staff so we could actually get a hard copy of it to take some action on some of the points that you have risen.
Yeah, I'll probably email it through along with my PDP feedback, because most of what was recommended was in that feedback. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, so we'll put the resolution. So resolution is there on the screen. So receiving the deputation from Davina Penny regarding the dust and providing a reply as soon as practicable. So Councillor Swiggs, you're wanting to move it. Councillor Robinson seconding. Okay, so can I have all those in favour please say aye? Aye. And any against? No, so that's carried. Thanks very much. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Lisa, could I just think maybe you should got. Sorry, just checking that there was contact details to get the presentation through to us. But I'm seeing nods that that's all sorted. That's great. Thank you. So going on then to item 5, we've got no extraordinary or urgent business I'm aware of, I think. And then notice of motion, we haven't received any. And so then we're into minutes. So we've got unconfirmed minutes, item 7.1. And we'll also... Okay, so... firstly, if there's any questions on the public minutes, the minutes that are in the public part of this meeting, if you have any questions on any of those are the open meeting minutes, pages 10 to 16. Do you have any questions or any typos or anything anyone wants to add? Seeing nothing. And then also just noting, if there's no questions to be raised or discussion to be held in relation to the PX minutes, which all the councillors have had those papers, then we can confirm those also in this open meeting. So, sorry, Councillor Mackay. Oh, you want to move the recommendation? I thought you were going to ask me. Okay, so I've got Councillor Mackay and Councillor Ward. So can I ask all those who are in favour, please say aye. Aye. And any against? No. So that's carried. Thanks very much. Okay. Okay. So now we're coming into the first item for decision, in fact, the only item that we have today for decision, which is item 8.1. So this is options for dust research and improving dust management in Canterbury. So can I invite Dialanica Silva, Strategy Advisor for Air Quality, Transport and Urban Development, and also Jessie Burgess, Senior Strategy Manager, to come to the table to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The purpose of this report is to provide the committee with an update on actions related to the Council's work on dust and to seek agreement on potential research into background levels of dust. I'll take the report as read, but will draw your attention to just some of the key points. On 6 November 2024, this committee considered the next steps following a literature review covering key areas associated with the Council's responsibilities for regulatory management of quarry dust. The committee resolved at this meeting to request staff to progress 5 key actions. This report in front of you today provides an update on 3 of those actions. The first action relates to a potential scope of work for research into background levels of dust in Canterbury. In response to this request, staff developed and analysed 4 options for the research scope with a focus on understanding the type of research that could lead to an improvement in dust management in Canterbury. This process involved input from Te Whatu Ora. From the analysis, there was no option identified that would clearly lead to improvements in dust management in the long term. However, staff recommend there are 2 potentially viable options to select from. These options focused on localised background levels of dust in residential areas around Christchurch quarry zones and ambient background levels of dust in Central Plains, with a long-term 10-year permanent research site and potential additional application related to climate change and fires. Either option would be a strategic shift in Council's current services towards providing air quality research on unpolluted areas to improve industry practice, which goes beyond the Council's responsibilities. If the committee agrees to one of the options for research, the Science Group will need to develop a more detailed scope and proposal for the research, and the funding of this research will need to be considered through annual or long-term planning processes. The second action relates to engaging with Te Whatu Ora to understand how their updated health statement on dust impacts could inform the Council's consenting and compliance processes related to quarry dust. Staff have worked closely with Te Whatu Ora to understand potential implications of their updated health statement. Te Whatu Ora have noted that the international and national research referred to in their updated health statement applies to all air quality matters, not just dust. Any health statement on air quality matters requested of Te Whatu Ora will now reflect the updated research. This research is general in nature and not site-specific. Due to the nature of air pollution, site-specific information is required for informing consenting and compliance processes, meaning Te Whatu Ora's updated health statement is not considered to have any impact on these council processes. The research referred to in the updated health statement is already being considered and used in the sector and needs to be first considered in terms of how it applies to the New Zealand or Canterbury context and folded into higher level regulatory documents. And the third action is around exploring opportunities to enhance community engagement, including the possibility of establishing regular community workshops or forums to address quarry dust issues. So staff analysed 4 options regarding opportunities to enhance community engagement. The risk-based analysis showed that existing mechanisms for the community and stakeholders to engage with the council on dust issues remain appropriate, and no additional groups or mechanisms are required. So staff wanted to ensure the best use of community members' time and to have the most impact on improving dust management in Canterbury. I'll take the rest of the report as read and happy to address any questions or points of clarification as required. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. So can I have questions from councillors, please? Councillor Swiggs.
Yeah, I've got a lot of questions, but I'll start with one and then we'll go, let's see where that goes. But the one that I really want to dig into is the staff comments around the Te Whatu Ora updated health statement. So what specific? I can't necessarily feel like I can accept that comment that you've made. So what I really want to understand is the specific criteria, legal tests that would be required of us to then allow that updated health statement to trigger a review of our processes. Because at the moment it's just saying no, but what can we do to enable it to have an impact?
Through you, Chair. So, I'll just read out the statement for the council, so you're just aware of the context around that, if you like, just to enable the conversation here. But so originally, the statement that they released back in 2018 was that the results show there's no serious health risk to Alderhurst residents from airborne dust. Nuisance dust levels will not cause long-term health effects, but we know it can cause irritation and symptoms of concern in some people, and we've prepared a fact sheet with advice for residents. The updated statement that came from Dr. Pink at Public Health at Te Whatu Ora stated updated international and national research reports, World Health Organization and Health and Air Pollution in New Zealand, so WHO and HAPPENS, shows that exposure to dust has the potential to impact public health in a more substantial way than has been previously understood. New evidence shows that there is strong association between exposure to dust and adverse health impacts. The strength of this relationship depends on the frequency, amount, and duration of exposure and the location distance from the source. So my understanding and my reading of that statement is that where you're dealing with specific circumstances around a dust discharge, that's where that potentially could be considered. You'd have to have an understanding of the relationship, so the frequency, amount, and duration of exposure and the location and distance from the dust source. So when you're going through consenting or compliance processes, these are the things you need to consider. So my experience in resource consenting, many years of being involved in that space, certainly from an amenity perspective, dust has always been considered, and the air discharge consents look at how far that dust would go. In terms of health, it would depend on, I guess, in terms of that statement there, you would need to consider those aspects through a consent process. Now, that's all based on evidence, dependent on the evidence that you have before you as a decision maker. I know there's been comments raised about consent processes and commissioners and you go through that RMA process, you assess it under the district plan and the regional plans that are appropriate and apply at the time. And so coming back to that health statement would be around the duration, the frequency, the amount of exposure, and the location and distance from the source. So that will vary dependent on the circumstances of the air discharge from a quarry.
You really, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's fine. I mean, I do understand that. But I mean, our resolution that we asked you was in 1.2, and the paper resolution 4D was to engage with Te Whatu Ora to understand the health statement, dust impacts. Yes, you've given us a rundown of what we've currently got. But what I want to understand is that health statement was made in the context of another health statement, which was directly related to the Oldhurst study. So in that context, I wanted to understand, even if it wasn't necessarily possible for this council to do, but I wanted to understand what could be done to take that health statement seriously so that we can either advocate or change policy or do something so that we can potentially understand it a heck of a lot better, because at the moment it's just a couple of words on a piece of paper. But it is a serious thing in a context of another statement which was based on a study. So I just feel like we haven't gone deep enough, and I'm not sure where the disconnect is.
Through you, Chair, I can add a bit more information regarding the health statement. So the health statement highlights the importance of ensuring appropriate evidence is provided to inform decisions. But a decision on a particular consent, as Jessie mentioned, must be based on site-specific evidence. So the updated health statement from Te Whatu Ora, it doesn't necessarily add additional site-specific information. It's informed by general evidence used by the sector. Now, the new evidence from WHO and HAPPENS applies generally, and it's best considered in terms of how it applies to the New Zealand or Canterbury context, and then it's folded into higher documents.
I'm just going to ask one subsequent thing here, and then I'll pass it on to somebody else to ask some questions, and I'll maybe come back. But in resource consents for dust discharge, applicants were using the statement from the Ministry of Health, from whoever it was, that the dust was not causing issues. Now they've changed that statement, and I'm not hearing any evidence or any way that we're sort of addressing that. It was used as evidence, the previous statement. Now that's been quashed and put it in a new statement, but I'm not seeing how that. Do you kind of get where I'm getting? I'm really struggling a little bit here to understand why we're not taking a little bit more of a deeper dive into that particular statement so that we can find out what we can do rather than what we can't.
I guess this, as I've said a couple of times, it's very much depends on the circumstances of the application for. So if you are looking to expand a quarry, as Davina just mentioned before, you have to consider the effects on the surrounding environment and what are those effects, and whether or not you've also got policy direction within both your district plans and your regional policy direction around assessing what the effects are and what degree of effect there is on the environment surrounding. Now, each different type of activity under the RMA, so you could have permitted activities, restricted, through to non-compliant activities, and different levels of assessment under each of those activities standards. So coming back to each individual quarry and the assessment and the evidence is specific to that quarry and the surrounding environment. So in the context of that health statement and saying where it talks about evidence and the strong association between exposure to dust and adverse health impacts, that would be dependent on the scope of the application that you're dealing with, the degree of assessment of effects would apply. And it talks about the strength of the relationship between frequency, amount, and duration of exposure and the location and distance from the source. All of those things are adverse effect considerations when you're going through a resource consent process. In terms of reviewing consents, which is also covered here, we would have to be aware of a significant adverse effect that is happening because of a particular enablement of a particular consent. Every individual consent would be based on that understanding of what is that impact, and then you go through a series of tests to understand whether a 128 review would be appropriate or not. So quite a complex space to sort of work through, and we could work through that with the council in a separate.
I get it. I get the processes of the RMA. I just wanted to understand what can be done, but let's park it. I just don't think I'm going to get what I'm asking. So it's not a thing I understand what you're trying to say, and I get it, but it's. Yeah, I'll maybe need to frame this question better somehow.
Yep, come to the table, please, Andrew.
I think I'm following the conversation, and Jesse's 100% correct. I think the thing, though, that Jesse hasn't said here, that probably because he was in the heat of battle, is that we don't really have any control as to what an applicant might put on the application that comes through. And absolutely in the past, it seemed very clever for an applicant to put down in their application, here's the advice from the Ministry of Health. Now, there's not that ability to do that anymore in quite the same way, or at least that evidence can be refuted very quickly. But at the end of the day, what Jesse's saying is that regardless of what an application or an applicant puts forward in their application, we consider that with the best scientific advice that we have available to us. Now, that's changed over time. That changes our approach. But what we can't change is what we actually get in the door by way of that application. And I just wanted to add that to Jesse's answer that he was saying there. And I think it might help you there, Councillor Swiggs, too.
Can I ask a question on the, and I don't know if this will be one that come to Andrew or to you, Jesse, but just on that, and then I have got a list of other councillors who want to ask questions, but when we get an application come in and we've got modelling and data that's to say, this is going to meet acceptable standards and so on, do we do retrospective monitoring to check that data that we were presented with is actually an accurate reflection of the reality subsequently? And I know, this is a sort of question that goes to all types of modelling that we have come in. You get it in, you do your best assessment on a model. So then, where does that go?
Do you want to get Jen to come and answer that? It's her neck of the woods.
So, if any particular member staff need to come and answer that question, please come to the table.
So through you, Chair, we have a number of staff in the room here today to be able to answer questions, and probably best that Paul and Jen speak to the consenting side of things in that respect. But yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, could you just repeat that again? You spoke about retrospective monitoring.
Is that correct?
I get monitoring to look retrospectively at, or monitoring to test that when we've had something come through an application saying our modelling shows that this will be fine. I'm assuming there's some data that is predicting how this quarry is going to, what amount of dust is going to be affecting local residents from a quarry operation, and it's all theoretical at the time it comes through as a consent application. Do we then set things up to actually test, is this the reality at the end of the day? Is this matching, so that we can learn from that and adjust if we need to as well?
That gets reflected, or through the chair, apologies, that gets reflected in the consent conditions. So it's a requirement of at least the newer consents for quarries around monitoring of PM10 on their site and what they need to do if an exceedance, so either cease or they have to use water or actions like that. And then for some of the older consents that don't necessarily have that, that's just becoming best practice, requiring that, because that is, if you are a quarry operator, that is how you should operate. So the simple answer is it gets put into consent conditions to monitor, but it's on their site, and they're doing the monitoring, and we're monitoring the outcome of that.
I guess that then begs the question, like, do we feel that that's independent enough if we're relying on data coming from the consent holder, which I think gets to a point that was raised in the deputation before. And if not, then, is this something that we because we do, for example, groundwater monitoring on a wide scale, for example, and, there's other mechanisms in place for other types of consents that gives us our own independent data. But do we have something along those lines for this topic for dust as well?
Oh, sorry. So from a compliance perspective, we're monitoring adherence to their compliance obligations. And so best practices to measure, is there dust coming off their site? Does that adhere to their conditions? The question I think that maybe you're being asked today is there other monitoring required above and beyond that? And so that's more for the organization, science, or, to determine.
That's helpful, thank you. Now, so I've got Genevieve, question.
Got a couple of different scramblings here, so bear with me. I'm going to ask you the same question actually as I asked our speaker before. What do you think the key thing is effectively enabling quarries to operate in residential zones? What is the enabler of allowing these things to, happen in close proximity? It might seem loaded, but it is actually a question.
We're going to tag team through a few different staff, I think, Chair, on some of these questions. So, look, quarries are governed both by the regional policy statement, the air plan, and also the district level plans across the region. So in Christchurch City with Yoldhurst, the Christchurch City district plan has rules around the quarry zone and also has rules around the rural zones surrounding. This quarry zone in Yoldhurst goes back 40, 50 years, Nellie, I think, to the original quarry zone. And there was a Environment Court proceedings back early 2000s, I think, late 90s, early 2000s, that looked at expansion of the quarries outside the quarry zone. So this is where it was going from the quarry zone into the surrounding rural area. The consents way back that went through the Environment Court at that time was around processing of material being brought back into the quarry zone to process, where the actual face of the quarry had been expanded out further and into the rural zone. And that's what you've seen since then, setting a precedent for, under the previous council district plan, for a number of quarries in the area to expand beyond the existing or the previous quarry zone and into the surrounding rural zone. With appropriate consent conditions and things that have evolved over time as well in terms of best practices, as Paul and Jen just mentioned. So that's kind of the background history of how some of the quarries within the Yalthurst area in particular have expanded from what was originally a smaller quarry zone into the surrounding rural area, in line with both the regional and local level planning provisions.
Just a supplementary to that then, another loaded one, I'm afraid. Do you think that potentially a change of use of water could actually make more quarries pop up in residential areas? Or anywhere?
Well, I guess there's quite a number of elements there, Councillor Robinson, in terms of what might push for more quarries. I guess ultimately there's a supply and demand issue here. There's a demand for aggregate and there's a need to supply it. Absolutely, the use of water is necessary as a mitigating factor. And if there is no ability to get water onto the site, then applicants may look at other ways of mitigating dust. What they are, I don't know about them, but what I do know is that water is a very good mitigator for the effects of dust. So therefore, I don't think that the taken use of water is necessarily a determining factor, but is certainly a mitigating factor around the expansion of quarries, if that helped answer the question.
Councillor Chair Pauling.
Kia ora. First of all, hey, thanks, Davina, for coming in and your continued advocacy in this space. I know you've been here a number of times, so just to acknowledge that and the workshops that we had in 2021 with the wider community. Just following up on Dion's questions, yeah, Resolution 5 in particular is really troublesome for me, and I can't support it because I don't understand how Te Whatu Ora can make a statement the way they have, revising it from the statement based on the Moat study in 2017, and then revising it in 2024. And I was in the room, and I was part of the letter that asked Te Whatu Ora for a response. And when we had a meeting with Te Whatu Ora after they sent their letter, I just don't understand how they can make a statement like that and then it doesn't have an impact on our resource management system. So I get that it needs to be site specific and all of that, and we can't control what a applicant puts in their applicant, and I get all that. But we do have a role in assessment, and so I would ask ourselves that the second part of that statement that's in our paper in 43, how we live up to that, how we ask those questions about the strength of the relationship, the frequency, the duration, the distance, all of that stuff, because I'm assuming we have a role in that assessment process, as do the hearing commissioners and people involved in making decisions. So my question here, and I get that what staff have done have responded to the previous resolution we passed about background levels of dust, because that came out of the literature review. I get all that, but I think we're asking the wrong question, to be honest. I think the question that we've heard from community over and over is concerns about the Moat report, is about health impacts on them from dust generating activities. That's what we need research on, not on background study. So that's our mistake for maybe passing that resolution. But I think we tried to link the Te Whatu Ora statement to that resolution so that it would get looked at. Because we really need Te Whatu Ora to help us now that they've revised their position based on other research, and they've said new evidence shows that there's a strong relationship, blah, blah. We now need that researched, and we need to do that site-specific in Canterbury. And I would expect that, as we did in 2017, we supported the District Health Board to do that study. It wasn't the other way around. It wasn't ECAN doing it with them supporting us. It was us in support of them. And really that needs to happen again. So unfortunately, I think we're asking the wrong question, because it does have an impact on our consenting, planning and compliance, because it needs to inform us. We now need Te Whatu Ora to work with us and the community and industry to now understand what their new statement means. That's what we asked for last time.
I don't know why we're not there yet, and I'm a bit like Dion. We need to move to that positive space of what can we do rather than the things we cannot do. So I can't support Resolution 5 because I don't agree with it, and I don't really agree with the options that have been put in front of us around the background levels of dust research, because I think it's asking the wrong question. It's focusing on the wrong issue. So sorry, I don't really have a question other than we do have a role in assessment of those matters, and where's the expertise in our building? And if we don't have it, where do we turn to answer those questions about what Te Whatu Ora has put in front of us with their new statement? Who answers that, and who provides the evidence and advice to help us say there is no issue here? Because the environment just doesn't include, birds and plants and stuff. It involves people. So there has to be a lens where that's being looked at. And if the applicant doesn't put it in their application, that's no reason not to look at it. We must look at it. And now we have this new statement from Te Whatu Ora. Who looks into that? Whose responsibility is that? So that's my question. And if you can't answer it, fair enough. But that's where I find we're not focusing on the right issues.
Yep. Do we have Claire, a member of staff want to come and speak to that? Thanks. So Claire Patterson, thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair. We have worked very closely with Te Whatu Ora on this, and we have talked to Dr. Cheryl Brunton about it, and in terms of what research is possible. So we were aware of the scope that we were given, but we also had our ears open through the process and the conversations that we had with the numerous staff that work on this and the Te Whatu Ora staff. And if I had heard anything through those conversations that I could have seeded the thinking through this document, I would have definitely have looked at how we could put that in, even if it was slightly out of scope. We didn't find anything. The cost of site-specific research to support health would be multi-million-dollar and would provide information without a change in the situation for the people living in the area. And there would then be also no guarantee that that information, because of the processes, would actually change the situation for the people living there. So hence not signalling that in any way. So we took a really strong lens, and I think we do have a paragraph in the paper to say this, around what would actually be, what would change the situation for the people of Canterbury? What does improving dust management in Canterbury need to look like? And the options we've presented are about an information gap, but again, whether or not that is used in the process, we have no control over. So you could strategically shift to provide that information, but then there's no mechanism to ensure it, much in the same way that every sector has your bell curve of your A, B, C, D operators. Your A operators probably already have information that's an asset that adds value to their organisation, so that's that financial incentive from their monitoring of their boundaries and having that. So it's a financial lever for the consent holders to monitor and have good quality information, through to the other end of the spectrum who, if they don't do that, they're not. And, you know, if we started providing that, then potentially there would be some who would use it, but there'd be some who wouldn't. So, sorry, I think I've strayed a little bit off track there, but in terms of the health impacts and the research and what would shift it, there wasn't something that came up in those conversations with health that we could identify and put in the paper. And it's also the home heating and transport exposure as well, because that is a prevalent issue that also adds to everybody in Canterbury. And the combustion-based air pollution also can contain benzoate-pyrene, which is a water-soluble carcinogen that gets into the food chain and would also add to those health impacts. So we haven't, being able to tease out a health impact for a person who lives so close to Christchurch and could be travelling in and working in that environment and all of those sorts of things is near on impossible from health's perspective to identify what is the source and what's creating that health impact. And their advice is you monitor the PM at the boundary as the proxy for the health impact from that site, which is what our consent holders do. And there's financial benefit to them of doing that.
Greg.
Thanks, Claire. My question, I don't think you can answer it, but from the discussions with the Whakatau, what is their plan for addressing the statement that they've then made? Because it's specific to dust. It's not about other issues, it's about dust. They made their statement about dust and the potential to have exposure to dust having adverse health impacts. So what is their plan to address this statement to help us do our role? And my other question that you may be able to answer is, and I don't think it was answered, so what do we do to assess that statement against applications? And do we have the expertise in-house? And if we don't, where do we go when we don't have the expertise? And what do we say about that? When we know we don't have expertise, what do we say in our responses?
So health's approach is to provide us with advice. That is their strategy, is to provide public health advice. So they don't provide any financial assistance, or their staff will work with us on that.
Yeah, I understand that. They've made the statement. I mean, this is the thing I'm getting. They've made the statement. We didn't make it. They made it. They're the experts in this space. It's just, what are they going to do now once they've made that statement to back up and help the regulator, us, in our job with our community, with the industry? That's really my question. And if you might not be answering because you can answer on behalf of them, but that's really at the crux of the matter here that we need some answer on. I'm happy to write them a letter to that effect.
And I think that it sounds like that we do need to be perhaps engaging more clearly with Te Whakatau and perhaps at a councillor or chair to Whakatau level. So just for me, as a question off the back of Craig's questions there, just asking simply, like, do we know what levels of dust are problematic for health? Do we have that? Do we actually know what levels of dust? And and then the next step, of course, is, are we hitting those levels of dust? And are we seeing those levels of dust in the residential areas adjacent to quarries?
So my understanding of particulate matter is that technically there's no safe exposure level, so it is set by standards. So it's working to the higher level documents that set those standards for the context.
And so our consents and the conditions, if they're fully complied with, would meet the current standards.
The higher order standards, which have not been, so the NESAC has not been updated for the new WHO guidelines and that sort of thing. Yeah.
And the NESAC would have tightened up on the dust side of things?
Well, it's site specific. So I think that's the really tricky thing with air quality, is that meters matter. So as soon as you start stepping meters away from the boundary, you get different information, different results, different exposure. So which is why it's a site-based. Then there's the New Zealand ambient air quality guidelines, which are different again from the national environmental standards. But none of those are being updated by MFE as far as I'm aware.
Okay, thank you. So Peter.
Thank you. You said, Claire, and I don't want to take your part on this, but you said what we need is to look to understand what Canterbury looks like. Well, Davina's given you a few ideas over there when she came in with please this, please. You said, I don't know how many pleases you had. It's interesting that health advice can't be used around that, and I understand that, Andrew, in terms of what, and Te Whakatau are unwilling, and Te Whara Ora, on Craig's questioning, unwilling to come to here. So we need a reset on this. Look, I've been involved in this, in the air portfolio, since 2016, and we've been going round and round. This is a historic look at what Canterbury has happened in Canterbury, and it's not moving anyone anywhere fast, and it's frustrating. I would tend to think the quarry owners and also the residents about the circumstances there, because they keep talking about the same thing. We've been talking about this. Interestingly, the Quarry Association in Australia, they recommended the setbacks because they wanted to keep the houses away from the quarries. We're now saying we want to keep the quarries away from the houses. So, I mean, we need some sense in this whole thing. We've got a joint work program with Te Whara Ora, CCC, and ourselves, and I would suggest to you that we need to make better use of that. My question is that in our air plan, PM10 is the standard, and people have talked about PM10. If it was PM 2.5, would that be different? And the other part of that question is, are we lacking some national direction in terms of a NESAC that would help us get through this? Because I understand that that's been stalled off, Claire. I don't know how many times I've talked to you about that. It's been stalled off for a number of years, and it needs updating to a World Health Standard. If it was 2.5, would that make a difference here?
My understanding is that the updating the NESAC would absolutely make a difference in terms of the broad air quality management in Canterbury, and it would make it more targeted on the causal rather than correlated health issues. Whether or not that would change quarry dust management practices is several steps. So I wouldn't be able to say, yes, it would create that impact. But in terms of the better health outcomes, yes.
Thank you. David.
Thanks. Look, I'm just going to focus perhaps on recommendation 1.1, where we talk about, at the tail end of it, talking about independent experts. The previous submitter talked about commissioners potentially having an association with the industry. I have absolute confidence in that commissioner process, but the independent experts could fall into, well, I'm thinking may sort of fall into the same sort of category that we sometimes have with commissioners, in that there is not a great pool of experts in that field. And I'm taking a bit of cognizance of Chair Pauling's comments and Councillor Scott about sort of focusing on the health issues that some of these people are experiencing. And it's all very well sort of monitoring PM10 at various levels away from a quarry, but I'm not sort of seeing a lot of technical expertise around the health impacts on individuals that may live in proximity to these areas. So I suppose my question really is there an adequate pool of experts within the country that can provide this sort of information, or should we be expanding our range of appointment of these sort of people? This problem seems to have gone on for years and years and years, and the focus that I'm hearing now is more on health of people, and I don't believe that we're perhaps focusing as well as we should do. So is there an adequate pool of experts, and are they, that previous speaker also talked about being aligned to the industry as well. So do we need to go further afield and get expert advice on health implications for people in proximity to these quarries and get some better informed data, I should say, that's not open to scrutiny? Well, you're aligned with the industry.
So,
Kia ora, Councillors. The question's in relation to, in general, the expert advice around health effects, or are you talking about consenting?
Expert advice, generally.
So in terms of the air quality sector, it is a very small sector. I'm from the conversations that I've had in the sector, and when we've done scanning of the sector and the expertise, there's only one entity that doesn't work with industry in New Zealand. We also looked at CASANS, which is the Australia and New Zealand Clean Air Society, and they have a database of organisations, and the ones that were on there that were also in Australia also worked with industry. However, we've also had conversations with Te Whatu Ora and speaking of our science colleagues that we have in-house are very good at their job. And so they have a really good understanding of air pollution and particulate matter. And so we, in strategy and policy, we're not the scientists, but we use their advice, and they are independent, even though they're in-house. Because, so I'm not... Does that answer your question?
To a degree. I think I was probably more focusing on, do we have an adequate pool of experts in this area? I mean, we can talk about in an RMA context of having technical experts, and we can have evaluative experts as well. It's more the technical expertise that I'm looking for that would give us a better direction on where we are tracking with public health in people that live in proximity to quarries. And I think that pool, from what I'm hearing, is pretty limited. And so I'm not sure whether we need to be casting internationally a bit more for some more perhaps independent technical expertise in this public health area.
I'd caution, because I'm concerned that not answering the question or being out might lead you down a path of saying that we need to get more experts into the. So I think we should probably take that one away and say, do we actually think? Because I would have thought that if we did have those concerns, we would have raised them with council previously. So I think it's probably prudent to just take that question away and maybe speak to our colleagues in science as well to see if they share that view.
Thank you.
Thanks. Jolie.
Kia ora. My question is around looking at exploring community engagement. Express that was something that was wanted and needed, and staff have come back and said to stick with the status quo, which I'm a little confused about because I feel like it kind of contradicts what the residents are saying, like Lavina, that they want to be involved rather than informed. So I'm just wondering how you plan to, or how you're wanting that to happen through not changing anything.
So through you, Chair. So currently there's a number of mechanisms where the community can engage with ECAN, for example, addressing the concerns for elected members, writing emails to us. They have their say through consenting and compliance processes. And I've listed a few more on the paper as well. So currently we have a number of ways for the community to engage with us. And by introducing different mechanisms, it might not create a benefit because we already have about 4 or 5 ways for them to communicate with us.
Oh, okay. I was also, I personally, I feel like some of those options maybe aren't super accessible and inviting, but that I guess depends on the person. But I was wondering for like when it comes to community workshops under community impact, it's poor, and then status quo community impact saying it's good. I don't quite understand how that works because in my brain it would be the complete opposite.
It's about you could have a workshop, but if it doesn't actually feed into a statutory change or a democratic process, then it's not going to create the change the community is looking for, which would then lead to, which is what you've heard this morning, frustration that there was a meeting that seemed to go nowhere. And so we're not recommending to have more meetings that go nowhere because that's just annoying to people. So the status quo is focusing on having the meetings that are directly related to where change is actually happening, and that feedback can be taken in through those democratic and statutory processes.
Liam.
Kia ora. I just would like some background just in terms of quarry zones. So I know they brought up in the deputation earlier an event last year, and obviously you can't speak to the specific event of someone who might have sold their house and that's been kind of revamped into part of the quarry. Now, are those quarry zones, are they like set in place, or are people's properties that they might have residential houses on, are those like within the quarry zone? I guess just maybe background on that.
I can answer that through you, Chair. So, as I said earlier, there is a quarry zone within, using the Christchurch example, there's a quarry zone. And what has traditionally happened over time is that so it's a special purpose quarry zone, and it's expanded out over into the rural zone surroundings. So through resource consents, as opposed to rezoning the land specifically for a particular purpose. So you could go through a plan change process under the RMA and rezone land. So when the Christchurch City, when they did their district plan review, they didn't look, as I understand it, didn't look to expand the quarry zone. There was expansion happening by virtue of resource consents into the surrounding rural zone, and the effects are assessed under that. Because essentially part of the argument is that when you rezone that land for quarrying, the value of the property would go up as well. So.
Yeah, and those maps are made by the City Council.
So the regional plans and policy statements provide direction, strategic direction. It's the district level plans that would actually put the rules in place around that quarry zone and the rural zone surrounding as well, the types of activities that could occur there as well. So, and it looks at the reverse sensitivity issues and things when you do look at zoning of land or through consent processes as well.
Thank you. Grant.
Thanks for your presentation. I feel though for me that there's been such a long time ago that we actually looked at these things a little bit more closely in terms of the Oldhurst research that was undertaken and what that delivered for us and the community. So just for me, just lacking a bit of information on that. But just picking up on your mention of reverse sensitivity, which was mentioned and discussed in the spatial plan, the Greater Christchurch spatial plan, and that considered the proximity of an activity to residential, and in vice versa, expansion of residential going in the other direction. And that land in between was really important, that it's almost a no-go on activity and a no-go, say, on housing. And to that extent, to my mind, it relates a little bit to the regional policy statement idea that we have a minimum 500 metres. I'm thinking, well, where did that come from? Why 500 metres? Is that adequate? Dust blows in the wind for a long distance, much more than 500 metres. Which brings me to the question of the data resource that we've got. And this option 1 on page 23 talks about 1 or 2 sites doing some evaluation. And I'm wondering, in our current scientific analysis, do we really look at the distance back from the boundary? Well, obviously there's stuff going on at the boundary. How much data do we collect further back from that in the round, if you know what I mean? Dust blows from the west, the north, those sorts of things. So it seems to me if you're only going to take 1 or 2 sites, is that sufficient? Is your data sufficient in terms of distance?
So the approach is at the boundary. So that's the whole RMA consenting approach, is discharge over the boundary. Normally with like industrial stuff like process heat or whatever, you measure at the stack at the top of the chimney to model what happens at the boundary. Further away from the boundary, that is an information gap. So in terms of how it's all structured, is you have the national environmental standard that we monitor to, which is to put regulatory grade monitoring in areas where it's prone to pollution, and that ambient air where it's prone to pollution. So that's not about monitoring where it's not polluted. And then you have potentially with the new Crown Research or Public Research Organisation restructure, potentially they might have a role in understanding the environment that's not polluted, but it's super unclear at the moment as to where that will land, and particularly in terms of air quality, because there's a health one and an environmental science one, so it's a bit unclear. And so the options in the paper, which are about background levels of dust, is kind of that information gap where it's not being filled by private organisations because there's commercial value in having that information held by the consent holder. So they don't collaborate and put their information together that they've got to kind of create a public picture of that. Does that?
No. No, well, I can understand what you're saying, but it seems to me in the discussion we've been having that approach of only looking at the boundary when we know the boundary is actually the problem between activity and where people live. But and I'm also thinking of the health to Whakatau. What information do we get from them in terms of the issues of the health issues and the distance back that people are experiencing those health issues? It might be at the boundary as being the most polluted part, but how far back? What are the transects that we have given around that site and that zone? Do Whakatau actually have that information, the medical information about people's dust that's falling on their house, their inside their house, on their lungs? Where does that fall?
I was going to go, but you can go, Andrew. I'm no scientist, and I'm using my recollection historically here. But part of the 2017 work that was conducted by Te Whakatau we captured some of those the wider effects on dust on properties. I think that was done in 2017. So the answer is they've got at least some historical data around the effects, I think.
I've been listening to the conversation for a while, And I just thought Jesse's given a really good outline of what happened in the City Council space around the quarry zone. I thought maybe one of the things that might join some of this together around data is thinking through, Environment Canterbury has an obligation to manage the discharges to air. And we do that in the way of quarries by ensuring that the discharge isn't offensive and objectionable. And Claire's entirely right. We do that right at the boundary at the moment. The bit that I don't think we've connected up is that the information that we have has changed over time. We're learning more about the impacts of quarry dust on people's health. When we pulled together the air plan, we had some of a little bit of an idea behind this. And at the time, we pulled together a 250 metre setback. Now, you're going to ask me, what was the science behind that, Andrew? And there wasn't great science, right? We knew that dust had an impact on health, and we knew the closer you were to the dust, the worse the impact. We didn't know how bad the impact. Those were the parameters. And when we went to a hearing, we essentially got entirely shot down from a lack of evidence, right? And we don't have a setback. We just have, at the boundary, offensive and objectionable. Since that point in time, the air plan's a bit old now. It's kind of 2015 kind of time. That's 10 years. We've learned a bit since then. We now know, and we included in the regional policy statement a 500 metre setback. What we're trying to say is that we're knowing that there's more of an effect. No one on stage has and can say that's the right setback. And the reason why is that has not gone through a statutory process yet. So we're all sitting here going, we can't really answer that question. But we've done the thinking, and the next step is to actually run that sort of thing through a process. I think that the science that you're talking about here, what you're doing is you're saying we need to get a bit more knowledge about the impacts of dust. We know we've got statutory processes coming, a regional policy statement, potentially a spatial plan. We're going to do better managing dust in that. But to do that, we need to have a good handle on what the impacts are for people's health. Otherwise, we're going to walk into another 2015 air plan problem where we put a setback out there, a setback for both residents and the quarries, and we lose it through the statutory process. And I thought maybe if I just spent a few minutes trying to tie these different pieces together, that would be useful for you to make a decision.
I would say yes, exactly. That's what we need. So who's going to do it, and how are we going to do it?
Yeah.
And through your chair as well, I mean, ideally, ideally through MFE, we would have some national direction around setbacks for quarries. That's something I know personally that I raised with MFE 10 years ago. And it would be good to see that in national direction potentially around what is considered an appropriate setback for particular types of activities, including quarries. So it is an issue that's come up many, many times, and it needs the evidence supporting it. But at a national picture would be good to have that direction and then feed down through, as Claire said, into the national environmental standards that apply as well. We see that in other spaces around urban development and other national policy statements that we see come through. So this would be potentially a point of advocacy for the council to government. Particularly, we're going to see some direction through the RM reforms, but we're still working through what that might look like at this stage, a little direction in that respect. So, but that would be a point to note, I think, is having some direction from government around what would be an appropriate setback supported by evidence, so that not every single council around the country is relitigating the same issues at huge cost to the public, when we could actually do that at a national level. So I just leave you with that point as well.
Just a question to that though. Surely the setback would vary depending on the type of quarry. I mean, we're talking specifically here about gravel quarries, but if we're talking about something else, so there must surely need to be some local science evidence.
Yeah, and then through your chair, there would be local conditions applied to that as well. But you might be. This is what that could explore, I think, is where you've got some a degree of consistency across the country in applying setbacks, but local circumstances will also be part of that consideration as well. So, and as we talked about right at the beginning, the environment is really important in terms of what the environment that's being exposed to a particular activity. And it's not just also quarries. That you can talk about all sorts of different discharges that apply from pig farms or chicken farms and all sorts of different applications that we receive as a council for consents. So, yeah.
Would it be fair, though, to say that, I mean, in the absence of being able to get some certainty that the government will set these various limits, that as a regional council, there are still some things that we can do that would be, useful bits of research or data collection that could then give us more certainty. I mean, I just having clocked that we put forward a 500-metre setback, but without necessarily having the data to support that and get it over the line, or to at least be the starting point for discussion with opponents to that through that process. Like, we need to be surely setting ourselves up for that, knowing that this has been a really long and ongoing issue. So can we think about that, or is there a mechanism that you've already thought about to make sure that we're going into that well equipped?
So setbacks have been explored through district plan plan change processes as well. So that has been explored previously, and Environment Canterbury, and as Andrew said, the 250-metre setback has been something that's been considered previously, but going further in the RPS would be looking at potentially 500 metres. You need the evidence to support that and go through that statutory process. What was I going to say? Sorry, I've just lost my train of thought there. That's something that will need to be tested through that process. Individual consents also consider the adverse effects on individual properties as well, and that's where that's an arbitrary kind of line. You can go through that consent process to consider what the effects would be on a particular receiving environment in that respect. So I'll come back to my other point when I.
And sorry, I'll get to Genevieve's got another question, but I'll just quickly, just to the point, when the word pollution has been used in this report, I wasn't clear whether that meant not dust. When you talk about, I think this is really to you, Claire, you mentioned pollution just before as well. When you're using that word, are you meaning things that aren't dust? Is that you referring to like the home heating so on, or the dust is included within the term pollution?
I use the word pollution to mean human-generated things that are put into the hautakiwa.
So all of the above.
Yeah. And we didn't want to put any more definition around it and to leave that to the scientists when they do the research scope and work that out.
So Genevieve had a short question, and then we'll move on to Greg and Dion. I've still got you.
Just a short question. Just with regards to the self-monitoring and, of quarries and operators, I guess how confident are we in the data provided and collected by those quarry operators? And is that easily accessible in real time?
My technical expert had to go, so I'll do my very best, Councillor. I think, as Jen alluded to previously, that we obviously monitor the consent conditions, of which some of the information is that quarries supply, and we audit that and review it. And then there's also built up on the approach of a best practice approach. I think, and again, can I reserve the right to come back and confirm, but I think the information is available in terms of exceedances past boundary and all those types of things. I think that is. So I think we're seeing I remember being here in 2017 saying we promised to have a compliance uplift, and I'm pretty confident that that's what we've done. I think we're, notwithstanding the deputation may have alluded to the fact that community might not be complaining to the levels you'd expect, but we're not seeing huge levels of complaints. I think from memory there's about 45, and of which 5 were substantiated. So not huge non-compliances. Does that mean that we can't improve or do things differently? Absolutely. But I think as we stand here today, compliance in terms of adherence to those conditions and the data that we received, we're confident that in the main, there's compliance.
I do know that in terms of the non-regulatory grade monitoring that's done, our science guys, like Teresa, is absolutely onto it in terms of what's on the market, margins of error. Like, she's just all over that space, and she works in with the consenting team and are looking at that. She would probably be the best person to answer that, but I do, from like the meetings I've been in and what I've gleaned, is that most of what they created for monitoring kind of are designed in a way to protect it from tampering, because then they will get weird results. So it's designed to have that airflow through, and they're usually optical sensors, and then it does generate like just real-time information. Like most of the monitoring stuff that's out there, it's just as standard now as real-time to the minute kind of stuff. So that would be available to the operators, and then we would there's a mechanism to collect it in. So yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Burns?
Kia ora, thanks, Chair. I have a question for you, Davina, rhetorical, which is, I hope you don't feel like you're in a scene from Erin Brockovich, because there's a lot of what can't be done rather than what can be done. I know we're not in debate, but it's felt a bit like debate. Just sitting to, I do have a question. There's been a lot of really good stuff about what we could possibly look to try and do to come up with a solution, because ultimately, at the end of the day, until we literally have people lining up at medical centres coughing blood on a TV program, no one seems to be in a position to be able to do anything. So, which is completely concerning. I think out of this, there's been enough ideas brought forward. Is it possible, and this is my question to you guys or whoever, to either A, have amendments within this actually saying we will write to Te Whatu Ora, we will write to the Crown, whatever we want to choose to do, or are you able to actually synthesise, I guess, what's happened in discussion, even though it's questions, and say, here's what we heard and what we can do? Because I think everyone at the table wants to act, but there's an awful lot of and that's you too. Don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting you're deliberately being effusive or whatever. I can only imagine how frustrating it is but again, so my question after all of that is it possible to do either A, amendments, or B, a list of here's what we can do that actually will have some effect to ensure that people like Davina don't have to come in here and go, I'm really worried, and while it's anecdotal about someone with silicosis, have people turn up and... Anyway, you get the message.
Sorry, so just to say, that's for us actually to answer your question there, Greg, rather than the staff, and that is where we were heading to, but I have still got Councillor Swiggs wants to ask a question, and then we are then going to be deciding what do we do next.
My question was really related to the national environmental standards and policy statement updates that we've got through, the 21 that they're now consulting on. And I was just looking, I'm slightly concerned. I understand, I was looking at it, they're saying that they're going to make it easier to quarry. We need between 8.6 million tonnes to 13.3 million tonnes more to ensure there's enough supply and demand. And at the moment, I think we're doing something like 35 million tonnes. So that's quite an increase. So we're going to see more quarrying. And it's going to be easier to do quarrying. But I'm confused about this paper and the effects of the national policy statement consultations that are going through at the moment. And is it premature to make any decisions around that before we have a real full picture about what's going on in that space?
Through your chair, so just in terms of the national consultations that have just come out after the fact, after this paper was actually released as well. So certainly something we would need to consider going forward in terms of advice that we provide to council around our work in this space and how that aligns with any direction from central government in that respect. Certainly if it's looking to enable quarrying, it's a material that we need for construction, for roading, for a range of different outcomes. And yes, that's where the current government is enabling, I guess, in that respect, that industry. But in terms of the impacts and the effects, that's something we need to consider through the planning process and what that actually means for our communities. So we're going to have to weigh all of this up as we go through these processes, particularly when we get to, pulling together an integrated plan and look at that RMA process as we go forward. So.
Yeah, but what I was asking was, does that have any impact on the decisions that we've been put in front of us? Because it creates some uncertainty in my mind about potentially, the existing mechanisms might be great now, but we might have a whole lot of changes and they might not be appropriate. So I'm just worried that with the new stuff that's just come out, we kind of might be making decisions on this when we don't actually have the full picture anymore.
So through you, Chair. So I guess the options we've put forward in terms of and Andrew's just joined us as well, but the options we've put forward is around background research of dust, levels of dust. So council could still consider that's whether there's an information gap there and how we fill that gap. You're going to get briefings around the planning program going forward, taking account of the RM reforms and the direction that's taking, so we can respond in that respect as well. The other recommendations or resolutions in the paper around noting resolutions. Appreciate Chair Pauling's comments earlier around the Te Whatu Ora health statement, and we can explore that a bit further as well. Take your guidance about how you wish to address that a bit further, based on the advice that we've provided today. But I guess the decision making resolution is around the scope of detailed research around background levels of dust to support how we go about considering setbacks or future quarry applications and those types of things. So that's part of the picture, and hence why we went off and did that work to scope what that might look like, either localised or at a Canterbury level approach to that as well. So obviously with each having different benefits and costs associated with it, answering potentially different questions as well.
In short, I just wanted to say that if we know that dust is an issue, we know that the government's asking for more quarries, and we know that our job is to manage the impacts of discharges to air. Feels to me like we're going to be in the middle of this discussion because of what the government is signalling in its RM reform packages, national direction packages. We are going to have to try and manage those two impacts going forward. So, yeah, I wanted to reinforce what Jessie was saying there.
Sorry, just another thing to add as well. Potentially, we're going to have to embark on regional spatial planning as well for the region. So this is, when you start to consider these things across the board, where you locate future quarries to cater for growth across the region, you've got to take into consideration all of the impacts on the environment. You've got to think about transport. You've got to think about the amenity effects for neighbouring communities, all of those different elements that come into it. So that's another piece of work that'll come in due course as well. Yep.
Okay, I've got a quick question from Genevieve, Councillor Mackenzie. Now I'll try and wrap.
That's me again. I'm just looking on the City Council website regarding quarry sites and zoning. And there is the ability for an inappropriate quarry site to actually rehabilitate and be, offered, look at separate areas or more appropriate uses of that space and relocate. I'm wondering if this is maybe an angle that could be potentially looked into in our letter, if we choose to do so. Have you heard of any inappropriate quarry sites been relocated, I guess, or have anyone, because it's an ability apparently, so.
Through you, Chair. No, I haven't. My experience, I haven't heard of inappropriate quarry sites being relocated as such. I'm not sure exactly what that's referring to, but certainly rehabilitation of quarries, that practice or best practice has evolved over time in terms of certainly conditions on land use consents around rehabilitating as you go. So you might have a certain area of land exposed at a certain period of time for a certain period of time. So you progressively you open up a section, you move to the next section, you rehabilitate, you move through the quarry zone, and that's potentially something for discussion with the City Council or with other councils around how they manage conditions on resource consents for quarries where consents are required. But that's one way of potentially mitigating exposure of areas of land to dust, airborne dust. You have seen it in some quarries around Christchurch previously as well that have rehabilitated. So they generally push the bunds back down into the quarry and then they angle off the quarry face and then they plant it with soil and grass as well to try and minimise some of the exposure of the land. So, yep.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
I'll try to be brief, Madam Chair, but I took it from Craig's comments, and I agree with him implicitly, is that we need to focus on where the issue is rather than create a bigger problem than perhaps there is. And so my question really is are all quarries created equal in terms of the amount of complaints, or are the complaints specific to the quarries out by the Waimak and in that quarry area, which is the way I understand it?
I don't have a breakdown of where the complaints lie. That's something that I could bring back. I might have had it, but the compliance manager had to leave, so I can't answer that.
The only advice I can draw on so far is that we've had one dust complaint in the Yaldhurst area in the last 6 months, and that wasn't substantiated. But there's also a number of proactive monitoring approaches as well. The quarry industry, I can't speak for them. I mean, there's been a lot of change in that industry over time. There's, like in any industry, I think there's probably the good and the maybe not so good operators in different parts, but that's an assessment of where that industry is at. Best practices evolving over time in terms of how they approach the management of quarries across different parts of New Zealand. So,
okay, that's great. Thank you. So, Chair Pauling.
I was just going to say, I think it's got to do with that reverse sensitivity a lot as well. I mean, obviously, a quarry that's not got any residents around it probably doesn't see any issues, but where there's a lot of residents nearby, therefore you see a lot more issues, and hence the earlier comments on setbacks and getting that right is critical, and which we've tried to work on. And I think that's really the crux of the issue here, is that we need better research and information to help us give evidence to those what setbacks should be. And also what other mitigations can be given to quarry consents where they are near residents. So they are the sort of things that I from the whole process that we've been through on this, that I thought we were going to get to. And that's the sort of proactive space that I'd like to see us working in. And so when I think about that, and if others agree, I really find that the resolutions we have in front of us don't hit that point. And I don't think anything that I can see here really is focusing in on that. So that's really my feeling, is that I'd like to see us lay these resolutions over, to be honest, and go away and rework that in light of what Dion said as well around the new legislation that's been put forward, to see if we can come back and focus in, and also maybe another conversation with the Whatu Ora focused on how we get that evidence to support setbacks and mitigations going forward. That's what I'd like to see. So.
Yep, I think that's where it feels like to me that makes sense, and we can put some resolutions up to that effect. But I think if I can just sort of just broadly summarise a little bit of what I think I've heard, would that be? I'm getting so. I mean, I think my understanding is we've actually got two issues here. One is around potential future development and setbacks is a solution there, and we need to make sure that we are in a good position to really nail those when we have the opportunity through the process. But we also have very much at current time issues for current residents who are being exposed. Doesn't sound like we've got a great understanding about how much dust is causing what health issues, and we really need to engage with Te Whatu Ora on that, and that would be a letter to them, and also making sure that we're really well connected with our territorial authorities, and I think CCC in particular, to understand what they're doing. So, for example, talking about the rehabilitation as they're working, and that side of things, and then also advocacy to government, where we try and pushing on in multiple directions, and then trying to pull all of this together and sort of build up a proposal as to what can we do in those two separate areas. What things do we need to actually bring back to the table that staff can put to us to understand how to move forward and solve the problems for the residents, and manage the situation as best we can. Does that sound like a reasonable sort of summary? So it's really, at this point, it's not bringing the resolutions, it's we'll put them on the table. So if we've got can bring something forward up on the screen, and then we can park. So this is just agreeing that the agenda item 8.1, options for dust research and improving dust management in Canterbury, lies on the table and is not discussed at this meeting. So do I have a mover for that? Got Councillor Swiggs, got Councillor Suncor as a seconder. And so we'll park those, and then I think for staff to really take this away. I know that it's sort of been a long and really interesting and thorough conversation, and I really appreciate all the staff that have been in the room to answer the questions. I appreciate some of those. We need more detail from some of the staff that aren't in the room, and so then we'll if you guys can take that away and then come back to us with some timelines as to when. So here we go. So this is the motion. So all those who are in favour, please say aye. 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 And any against? Nope. So that's carried. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so we'll move on now to item 9.1. So this is the resolution status report. What we'll do as well is connect. So we'll also note if there are no questions to be raised on the resolution status report in the PX. Sorry, can get all councillors seated again, please. Thank you. So I've got Councillor Scott moving and Councillor Mackay seconding. So any questions on the resolution status report? No. Okay. And so we're also then this, maintain. So this is staying all the PX as well at the same time. So all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? No. So that's carried. Thank you. And then we're moving into 9.2. So this is the central government update and submissions report back. We've got Cecilia Ellis, Principal Strategy Advisor, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, this is the standing information update on central government proposals of relevance to Council. I'll take the paper as read, noting that there are currently 3 consultations on the go. There's the Regulatory Standards Bill, which draft submission will be circulated shortly for feedback. There's also a high-level submission on the 2 DOC consultations being prepared, and that will be circulated for feedback next week. And yeah, just also to note that this paper was prepared before the national direction announcements, and there's a workshop planned on that next week. There's something like 700 pages of information. So staff are working through that, and the workshop will focus on high priority, significant aspects for council to focus on. And also just to note that the emergency management discussion document, consultation and submission to report back.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Korako.
Kia ora, Chair. E mihi atu kia koe, Celia. Hey, I'm just page 48 of the, well, it starts actually over in 47. Objective 1, strengthening community and iwi Māori participation. And that point 22, Ngāi Tahu is represented on the Canterbury CDEM group as an observer role only. And what my question is here, what was the engagement that was had in developing this paper with Te Rūnanga o Ngāi Tahu?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Karakia. So, Toronto policy colleagues were engaged with both the Joint Committee and council staff on these submissions, noting that the council submission is strongly aligned with the Joint Committee submission on representation, and that the Tuia team also inputted strongly into the council submission. Yep.
And I think Councillor Sanku wants
sorry, supplementary. Is that okay?
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah. In regards to, was there any discussion around, because do you know if that observer role is actually still active, or actually because of the restructure in Te Rūnanga that there is no longer any observer person on that CDEM? I know this is a bit wide.
So,
thank you for that question. Look, I will answer your questions there. At the recent CDEM meeting in Kaikoura on Friday, there was a recommendation that the Joint Committee Chair writes to Ngāi Tahu and acknowledging the work that has been done by whānau and emergency response teams. Elizabeth Cunningham has tendered her resignation, so she is not in play at this point in time at a governance level, and we have no one at an operational level sitting in the Justice Precinct. So the actions following on from that is that the Chair of Joint Committee is or will write to Ngāi Tahu requesting that a person with significant governance experience be appointed back to the Joint Committee in a governance role, and the officers of CDEM are working on bringing in Ngāi Tahu persons to sit in the Justice Precinct, providing advice under a budget that is available to them to put in place. So things are in action. They're not the role of this council to make those appointments, but we can influence if we can, particularly around the governance level. And it's the officers working through that process to bring staff into the, as I say, the Justice Precinct to work through those processes, which then align with I guess the contents of the Emergency Management Bill in further engagement and better engagement with iwi Māori. So it's a disappointment that we have lost those folk. They really did fill a critical role in our conversations, so we are working to bring someone back into the play, or some of them back into the play, to make that. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, kia ora. Thank you, John. And I'm just mindful that as a Ngāi Tahu councillor, this is part of one of my fiduciary obligations to ensure, there is a kind of a seamless, relationship, operational thing going on. Thanks very much, and I appreciate your help, John.
Just to finish it off, it is the role and responsibility of Ngāi Tahu to appoint that person to the joint committee. It is not for us to seek applications. So it ultimately comes down to a Ngāi Tahu decision, but obviously we might try and influence or have a conversation along the way, but it is their decision through their democratic processes.
Thanks. It was more that latter part of that comment from you that where we could be actually helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. And Councillor Scott.
Look, Chair, I'll pass. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor McKenzie.
Yeah, just thank you, Vicky. In Objective 1, it talks, and the headline is about iwi Māori participation, and that's all quite clear, but it also talks about disadvantaged communities, but it doesn't actually, apart from referring to Ngāi Tahu, it doesn't actually refer to what other communities that might be referring to. I was just wondering, have you got a view what other communities may be involved in that process?
Oh, sorry, I wasn't involved in the development submission, but
I might again answer that question. So disadvantaged communities are a range of communities, from rural and remote communities that are not in immediate confine and do not have services and like immediately around them post-event. So it's how do we build our thinking about how response and recovery looks for rural, remote communities. We can come back into the city or wherever. We can talk about immigrant ethnic communities where language is a real problem, where English is a definite second language and some difficulty. We can think about some of our populations. I say in the Waltham area, when the Heathcote River floods, we have a very high population of single retired folk almost in the geriatric space. So how do we take care of some of those folk when those events arise that do not either have the fitness or ability to mobilise? So there's a cross-section of what those disadvantaged communities might look like, how we empower and who has the role of both informing in the reduction and readiness phase and what it might look like in response or recovery. So just, a bunch of things. Where does that responsibility lie?
And if I may, just a follow-up question. So it's clear about, I thought it was relatively clear about how we engage with Ngāi Tahu and in representing their interests, but it's less clear to me how we are going to engage with those other communities you've identified, John.
So the conversation is, and we've had that conversation, and our belief is it's not a joint committee regional process, because we have said in the submission we do not have those skills, abilities and understandings to go into the communities in that sort of social economic space. That becomes then the role delegated back into the territorial authorities or the cities, who then have their community engagement people and folk with those skills to do and drive those engagements. So it's not for us at a regional level dropping it down into the TAs to a space where the right people have that ability to work in that space, and that's how the cascade works down through civil defence, both down and back up.
Okay, and Councillor Korako.
Thank you. Actually, just sort of supplementary to that and that question, and I mean, when we look at one of the values around Ngāi Tahu e Taroha ki te tangata, and basically what that means is that it's about looking after all others, and particularly ethnicities actually within our tribal takiwā, or rohe. Hapu takiwā and iwi rohe. So that's the other part of why Ngāi Tahu actually should be back in this, and because they also have that responsibility to look after those other ethnicities as well inside of their inside of their takiwā. So that is one of the responsibilities that Ngāi Tahu have undertaken, and particularly from Papatipu Runanga to Papatipu Runanga. You only have to actually see the work of Albert Amatani with the Muslim community and how kind of connected they very much are, with Ngāi Tahu and Papatipa Runanga. So in answer to that question, that actually morphs into kind of Ngāi Tahu, but it's a good question because it needs to be specific as to, how these groups looked after.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think that's all the questions asked. So if Cecilia, you'd like to step back from the table, we'll get a resolution up on the screen and we'll get, do I have a mover? Okay, it's coming up. Here we are. So do I have a mover for this? I can move it. Councillor Edge and seconder Councillor Scott. So can I have all those who are in favour please say aye? Any against? Oh yes, if you want a discussion, but then we're gonna. That's fine. Do you want a discussion? In which case we'll just do an extension. It's all good. Okay, so we've got Councillor Sunkel, Councillor Edge to extend, to second. All those in favour, please say aye. Any against? No, carried. Okay, so Councillor Edge, you want to speak to the...
Oh, just quickly, thanks, Cecilia, for organising all of this. It's really useful to see the amount of change that's potential on the agenda from the government, and we know that the raft of documents that came through over the weekend are pretty significant, and it's a matter of digesting what that means. And it's really helpful in terms of the prioritisation framework that you've given high priority, medium, and low priority. I'm reasonably happy with that, how that happens. For me, a couple of things that the red flags for me are the potential reassessment of the New Zealand biodiversity strategy and predator-free 2050, especially when we're in the middle of trying to finalise our Canterbury biodiversity strategy. So what that means, Indigenous biodiversity. And then one below that, which is something to watch too, is the NES commercial forestry, and what the implications of that might be on our rural landscape especially. The other thing for me is on the next page, more enabling policies in the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement. It is a major document within the New Zealand planning system, and the policies that they're looking at, targeted review of policies. They cover things like activities in the coastal environment, aquaculture, Indigenous biodiversity again, the preservation of natural character. You couldn't ask for a more natural character as the interface between the sea and the land, and the natural features and natural landscapes. I think staff are quite rightly put it in the high priority for consideration if anything comes through, and noting any bullet points on those. That's really all I've got to say to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Scott?
Oh, yeah, look, I wasn't going to say anything, but I'll take this opportunity since we're extended to say this is a pretty busy space that we're moving into now, and there's a lot of other things that I guess will be on councillors' minds as we head towards the end of the year, and this stuff's going to be overlapping. So we'll need to keep our eyes on it, and we'll need to keep a consensus amongst ourselves about how we're going to go about this. One of the overtly sexist things, though, however, in this legislation change is granny flats. What about the grandfather flats? Are we not considered at all in any legislation? I mean, I felt really humiliated. Or do we just go to the old people's homes? They get rid of the granddads and they take the grannies into the flat out the back. So that's about how it's going to go, guys. Is this what's going to happen?
Pensioner homes.
The grannies might be quite happy with that option, but anyway, just saying.
Tongue in cheek, Chair, but I think it's a good piece of work, Cecilia, and we just need to keep our eyes on it. Thank you.
And Chair Pauling.
I'm not going to talk about grannies at all. Look, I just want to acknowledge the work that's going on with our team. Cecilia, I know that you're doing a lot of this. Everyone can see the massive list of submissions and change that's upon us. But I just want to acknowledge council as well and the staff that we've worked on in terms of our position statements that we put forward and agreed to last week, that I believe will help us at least be able to talk about this in the interim before our submissions come forward. So just noting that and saying thanks to everybody for the support around that. And yeah, really acknowledging the work we've got on the Regulatory Standards Bill, the submissions on the 2 Department of Conservation things, as Cecilia said, and our workshop next week on the RMA National Direction Package. So yeah, it's all in front of us, people, and agree. Let's keep our eye on it and be sort of united as we can on how we respond. So thank you.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, there's certainly a lot of work that'll be coming through that we'll be having to put our minds to. So can I have, we've got a mover and a seconder, so all those who are in favour, please say aye. Any against? No, so that's carried. So thank you. So then just to say that the next meeting, not the last one, the next one, is going to be on the 23rd of July at 1 o'clock. And so we will reconvene then. And the closing will actually happen at the end of that. We've got a public briefing this afternoon. And so we'll finish with a karakia then. And so just to say thanks for all those who've been present. And it was a great discussion, I felt, on the dust in particular. So I know that was only one item, but it was good we had such a long time to talk that through. So kia ora. Thank you.